The silver ships appeared in Earth's sky on a Tuesday morning. They came in thousands, blocking out the sun over every major city on the planet. The ships were beautiful in their own way, smooth and gleaming like drops of mercury floating in the air. They did not fire. They did not attack. They simply waited down within 6 hours. Every communication system on Earth carried the same message. A tall, thin creature with 4 arms and skin like polished stone spoke in perfect English, and Chinese, and Spanish, and every other language humans used. Its voice was calm and pleasant. "We are the Vexthara Collective. We have come to bring you into our community of worlds. You may resist, but you cannot win. We have done this 1,000 times across 1,000 worlds. We do not wish to harm you. Surrender now, and we will make your lives better than they have ever been." The governments of Earth looked at their weapons and knew the truth immediately. Human missiles could barely reach the lower atmosphere. The alien ships sat in high orbit, untouchable. Radar showed hundreds more ships waiting behind the moon. Military analysts ran simulations and found the same answer every time. Complete defeat in less than a week if fighting started. So Earth surrendered. Not all at once, but piece by piece over 3 weeks. The United Nations voted for peaceful integration. National leaders made speeches about practical choices and protecting their people. Some citizens protested in the streets, but most stayed home and waited to see what would happen. What happened surprised everyone. The Vexthara kept their word. They landed construction machines that rebuilt crumbling roads and bridges overnight. They brought medical technology that cured diseases humans had fought for centuries. They shared blueprints for clean energy that made power free for everyone. They asked for nothing except cooperation and access to Earth's resources, which they paid for generously with more technology. Within a year, poverty on Earth dropped by half. Within 2 years, no human went hungry unless they chose to. The aliens, governed with a light touch, working through human administrators who found the new rulers surprisingly easy to please. Do your job, keep the peace, help your people prosper, and the Vexthara left you alone. Ambassador Krellix walked through the rebuilt streets of Detroit and felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful integration. He had overseen 17 planetary acquisitions in his career. Earth was proceeding exactly as the others had. The humans seemed happy, or at least content. Their children played in clean parks. Their sick received treatment in advanced hospitals. Their old prejudices faded as prosperity rose, but Krellix was old, and old diplomats learned to notice small things. He noticed how human smiles never quite reached their eyes when they thanked him. He noticed how quickly human engineers learned Vexthara technology, asking questions that seemed innocent but probed deeply into how things worked. He noticed that certain humans, particularly former military officers, had quietly disappeared from public life without explanation. One evening, he accessed Earth's historical database. The Vexthara always studied conquered species, but usually only their recent history. Krellix went deeper. He read about World War I and World War II. He read about Rome and Carthage, about the Mongol invasions, about the 100 Years' War. He read about Vietnam and Afghanistan and a dozen other conflicts where weaker forces had somehow prevailed against stronger ones. The numbers disturbed him. Humans had fought over 15,000 significant wars in their recorded history. They had killed each other in numbers that made his stomach turn. They had invented increasingly horrific ways to destroy their own kind. Nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons. They had looked at the extinction of their entire species and decided the risk was acceptable if it meant not surrendering to each other. But that was their past, surely. They had evolved beyond such savagery. The ease of their surrender proved it. They had looked at the Vexthara fleet and made the logical choice that the Vexthara Collective always forced species to make. submit and prosper, or fight and die. Krelix wrote a report for the Council, assuring them that Earth's integration was complete and successful. He cited economic statistics and cultural adoption rates. He mentioned the concerning military history, but dismissed it as primitive behavior that humanity had outgrown. The Council accepted his report with the same satisfaction he felt. 5 years passed. Earth became one of the collective showcase worlds, an example of how well integration could work. Human representatives joined collective assemblies. Human merchants traded across collective space. Human colonies spread to Mars and the moons of Jupiter, all under Vexthara's supervision and guidance. Then the colony ship, Harmonious Purpose, disappeared en route to Epsilon Eridani. It was a Vexthara vessel carrying supplies and new settlers to establish a mining outpost. One day, it was transmitting regular updates. The next day, it was gone. No distress signal. No debris field. Just gone. The collective security forces investigated, but found nothing. Space was vast and accidents happened. Equipment failed. Perhaps a meteor strike or a reactor malfunction had vaporized the ship before anyone could send a warning. They filed the incident and moved on. 3 weeks later, another ship vanished. Then another. Then 2 more in the same week. All of them disappeared in the outer systems, far from major colonies. None of them sent distress signals. None of them left traces. Krelix stood in the Security Council chamber and watched the star map as red marks appeared where ships had gone missing. 12 ships in 4 months. All of them in a rough sphere around human-explored space. The pattern was too consistent to be random accidents. Someone was hunting them. And Krelix suddenly remembered all those wars in Earth's history and felt cold. The Vexthara Security Council gave Krelix command of the investigation with 3 warships and authorization to use whatever force necessary. He departed Earth without ceremony and headed for the last known position of the missing ships. His crew was professional and confident. They had trained for combat but never actually fought. No species had been foolish enough to resist the collective in 300 years. The first clue came from a debris field near an asteroid cluster in the outer belt of the Tau Ceti system. Krelix airships found pieces of the cargo hauler Gentle Progress scattered across 1,000,000 kilometers. The metal had been cut with precision torches, not torn apart by explosion or collision. Someone had taken the ship apart deliberately, salvaging everything useful and leaving only scraps behind. His science officer studied the cut patterns and looked up with confusion in her large eyes. Ambassador, these cuts were made with our tools. Vexthara industrial lasers, not weapons. Someone took the ship apart piece by piece. Krelix examined the scans himself. She was right. This was not an attack. It was methodical deconstruction, the work of engineers who wanted to preserve and study every component. He thought about those human engineers on Earth, asking their careful questions, and felt his stomach tighten. They tracked the origin of the attack to a small moon orbiting a gas giant. Thermal scans showed evidence of recent habitation, underground facilities that had been powered and heated. Krelix led the landing party personally, armed soldiers surrounding him as they descended into carved tunnels. The base was empty, not abandoned in panic, but evacuated with planning. Equipment mounts showed where machinery had been bolted down and then removed. Storage chambers held nothing but air. Living quarters contained furniture, but no personal items. In what appeared to be a command center, someone had left a single object on a desktop. It was a book. An old paper book, the kind humans had used before digital storage. Krelix picked it up carefully. The title read, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. He opened it and found one passage highlighted in yellow. All warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. His translator had to work through the ancient human language, but the meaning was clear enough. Krelix stood in the empty base and realized that everything he thought he understood about Earth's surrender was wrong. The humans had not accepted defeat. They had chosen to appear defeated while preparing for something else entirely. He ordered his ships to search the surrounding systems. Over the next month, they found 6 more abandoned bases, each one carefully stripped clean. His analysts studied the locations and realized they formed a network, sites chosen to monitor Vexthera traffic patterns and identify vulnerable targets. The attacks were not random. They were intelligence-gathering operations. Krelix sent his reports back to the Council. They were skeptical. Humans had been model citizens for 5 years. The attacks must be pirates or rogue elements, not sanctioned resistance. But Krelix had lived among humans and studied their history. He knew what organized resistance looked like. He returned to Earth and requested a meeting with the Human Liaison Committee. They were polite and cooperative, as always. When he asked about the missing ships, they expressed concern and offered to help investigate. When he asked about the abandoned bases, they knew nothing. When he asked about human colony ships that had departed Earth before the Vexthara arrival, they provided records showing destinations and populations. But Krelix noticed that 12 colony ships had launched in the final weeks before surrender, supposedly heading for nearby systems. None of those ships had ever reported reaching their destinations. At the time, the Vexthara had assumed they were destroyed or lost. Now he understood they had simply disappeared into the vast darkness of space, heading for places not on any official registry. How many humans live off Earth? He asked the liaison. Approximately 40 million across Mars, the moons, and the near colonies. The liaison answered promptly. And how many left Earth on those last ships? The liaison checked his files. Nearly 2 million. They were lost in transit. A tragedy. Krelix looked at the human's calm face and saw the lie beneath it. Those 2 million humans had not been lost. They had been hidden. For 5 years, they had been building and learning and preparing while Earth itself played the role of obedient colony. The surrender had been a strategy, not a defeat. He brought his evidence to the Council. They studied it with growing alarm. The collective had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy that separated cooperation from submission. Humans had cooperated fully while maintaining resistance elsewhere. It was a form of warfare the Vexthara had no protocols for. The Council debated their response while more ships disappeared. The attacks grew bolder. An entire supply convoy vanished between Venus and Earth. Vexthara military patrol found itself ambushed by ships using modified collective technology, weapons that had been improved in ways Vexthara engineers had never considered. The patrol escaped but lost 2 vessels. Then the broadcasts began. They appeared on collective channels throughout human space, sent from locations that moved and changed too quickly to track. A human face appeared on screens across 100 worlds. We are the free human resistance. We did not surrender. We never surrendered. Earth made a choice to protect our people there while we prepared out here. You thought winning a battle meant winning a war. You thought comfortable occupation meant acceptance. You were wrong. We will take back every system, every ship, every piece of technology you took from us. We will fight for as long as it takes. We will pay any price. Because unlike you, we understand what war really means. The broadcast ended. Krelix sat in his quarters and thought about those 15,000 wars in human history. The Vexthara had won 1,000 wars by making surrender attractive. But humans had fought wars where surrender meant death or slavery or cultural extinction. They had learned not just how to fight, but how to refuse defeat even after losing every battle. The real war was about to begin. And the Vexthara had no idea how to fight it. The Vexthara Collective mobilized the 7th Fleet, 200 warships that had pacified entire sectors of space. They moved in formation toward the outer systems where human resistance was strongest, their sensors sweeping for any sign of the enemy. The fleet commander, War Marshal Dexron, had studied human tactics from their historical databases. He understood that humans favored ambushes and mobility. He would counter that with overwhelming force and disciplined formations that covered each other's weaknesses. The fleet reached the asteroid fields near Proxima Centauri, where intelligence suggested a major resistance base. They found nothing. No ships, no heat signatures, no electromagnetic emissions, just rocks and ice and silence. Dexron ordered a thorough search. For 3 days, his ships combed the region while their crews grew increasingly nervous. On the 4th day, 5 human ships appeared from the asteroid field, their hulls coated in reflective material that had hidden them from sensors. They fired missiles at the Vexthara formation and then vanished back into the rocks before the collective ships could respond. The missiles struck 3 vessels, damaging their engines and forcing them to retreat for repairs. Dexron ordered his fleet to pursue into the asteroids. He realized his mistake the moment his ships entered the dense field. Human vessels appeared from everywhere, firing from concealment and then disappearing behind tumbling rocks. They used the asteroids themselves as weapons, attaching explosives to large ones and pushing them into the paths of Vexthara ships. The collective vessels were bigger and more powerful, but the tight spaces negated those advantages. The battle lasted 6 hours. Dexron lost 18 ships before he withdrew. The humans lost none. They had never intended to fight a fair battle, only to inflict damage and escape. The War Marshal sent his report back to the Council with a single assessment. Human forces would not engage in conventional warfare. The pattern repeated across human space. Vexthara patrols were ambushed and destroyed. Supply convoys required entire battle groups as escorts, and even then some were lost. Human attacks focused on infrastructure rather than glory, targeting fuel depots and repair stations and supply caches. They fought like insects, Dexron thought, stinging and running before you could swat them. On Earth, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The Human Liaison Committee stopped answering Krelix's calls. Government buildings were abandoned overnight as officials vanished into underground networks. Vexthara administrators woke to find their human staff gone and their offices empty. The clean streets of the showcase colony turned hostile as resistance cells emerged from hiding. Krelix ordered his security forces to maintain order, but they were trained as police, not soldiers. Human attacks were surgical and terrifying. A Vexthara patrol would walk down a street, then a building would explode behind them, cutting off their retreat. Human snipers fired from windows and disappeared before response teams arrived. The aliens who had rebuilt Earth cities found themselves trapped in those same cities, unable to distinguish between peaceful citizens and resistance fighters in orbit. The space stations that monitored Earth suddenly went dark. Vexthara technicians rushed to investigate and found that human workers had sabotaged critical systems on their way out, creating cascading failures that would take weeks to repair. Without those stations, the collective could not track ship movements in the inner system. Krelix realized that the factories producing Vexthara technology on Earth had been modified by their human workers. Components coming off the production lines looked identical to standard parts, but failed after a certain number of uses. Warships throughout the collective fleet discovered that their replacement parts were sabotaged. Weapons misfired. Shields failed. Engines shut down at critical moments. The collective council met in emergency session. They reviewed casualty reports and strategic assessments with growing disbelief. They were losing, not quickly or dramatically, but steadily and inevitably. Human forces were bleeding them with 1,000 cuts. taking captured Vexthara technology and improving it in ways that seemed impossibly creative. A human missile designed from stolen collective technology could split into 12 smaller missiles that thought independently and coordinated their attacks. A human fighter craft combined Vexthara shields with human maneuverability, creating something neither species had built alone. Humans were not just matching collective technology. They were surpassing it through combinations the more conservative Vexthara had never attempted. Krelix spoke to the Council through a secure channel from Earth. They are winning because they understand war better than we do. We have fought 1,000 wars, but we won them all in weeks or months. We learned how to win quickly and efficiently. Humans have fought wars that lasted generations. They learned how to lose every battle and still win the war. They learned how to turn their entire civilization into a weapon. The Council asked him what he recommended. Krelix looked at the reports from Earth, where resistance fighters had just destroyed a Vexthara command post using explosives hidden in a children's hospital. The humans had evacuated the children first, of course, but the symbolism was clear. Nothing was safe. Nowhere was neutral. We have two choices, he said. Complete extermination of the human species, or complete withdrawal from all human-claimed space. There is no middle ground with this species. They will not accept occupation no matter how comfortable we make it. The Council debated for 3 days. Genocide violated every principle the collective was founded on. They were conquerors, yes, but benevolent ones who improved the lives of those they ruled. They had never exterminated a species and would not start now. But withdrawal meant admitting defeat, something the Vexthara had not done in centuries. While they debated, human attacks escalated. A resistance fleet struck at a Vexthara colony world, not to conquer it, but to demonstrate capability. They destroyed military targets and vanished before reinforcements arrived. The message was clear. Humans could strike anywhere. No Vexthara world was safe. Asterisk. The Council made their decision. They would negotiate. Surely humans would accept generous terms now that they had proven their strength. The collective would acknowledge human independence in certain systems, provide compensation, perhaps even establish a mutual defense treaty. It would be the first negotiated settlement in collective history, but better than endless war. They sent the offer through diplomatic channels. The human response arrived within hours. It was not an acceptance. It was a counter-demand that made Krelix's blood run cold. Complete and total withdrawal from all human-claimed space. Immediate cessation of all Vexthara activity in those systems. Return of all captured human technology and resources. A formal non-aggression pact enforced by mutually assured destruction. Because humans had captured enough collective weaponry to threaten the Vexthara homeworld itself. There was no negotiation. No compromise. The humans were dictating terms as if they had won. And the horrifying truth was, they had. The Vexthara Council chamber fell silent after the human demands were read aloud. For 300 years, the collective had dictated terms to conquered species. Now a species they had defeated in 3 weeks was dictating terms to them. The irony was not lost on the assembled leaders, but neither was the reality of their situation. War. Marshal Dex Ron projected casualty statistics on the chamber's central display. In 6 months of active resistance, the collective had lost over 300 ships, thousands of personnel, and control of 17 systems. Human casualties were unknown because the resistance operated in cellular networks that protected information even when individual cells were destroyed. Traditional military thinking suggested the Vexthara still held overwhelming advantages in ships and firepower. But traditional military thinking had failed completely against this enemy. They are using our own doctrine against us, Nexron explained to the Council. We teach species that resistance is futile because we can always bring more force to bear. But humans do not care about force ratios or casualty rates. They care about will. Every ship we lose weakens our will to continue. Every ship they lose strengthens their determination to resist. The mathematics of attrition work in their favor because they are willing to pay costs we are not. Council of Vreshka, the oldest member of the assembly, spoke quietly. In all our conquests, we never faced a species that had already learned how to fight this kind of war. Humans spent thousands of years fighting each other. They perfected resistance against their own kind before we ever arrived. We conquered them at their strongest, and somehow that made us vulnerable. Krelix attended the council session remotely from Earth, where he remained under constant threat of assassination. His quarters were now a fortified bunker, and he only moved with heavy guard. The showcase colony had become enemy territory. In his report, he laid out the fundamental miscalculation the collective had made. We believed that winning the war meant controlling Earth. We never understood that Earth was not the war. Earth was a strategic sacrifice that protected the real resistance in the outer systems. While we occupied Earth and congratulated ourselves, 2 million humans scattered into space and built the infrastructure to fight a generations-long conflict. They were always planning for this moment. The Council reviewed intercepted human communications. Resistance cells operated with sophisticated coordination, despite having no apparent central command. They shared intelligence and resources across vast distances. They adapted tactics based on Vex-thorough responses with frightening speed. And most disturbing, they showed no inclination toward negotiation or compromise. One intercepted message had come from someone claiming to be a resistance leader named Chun. It had been broadcast on all frequencies as a response to the collective's offer of negotiated settlement. You came to our world and took our freedom. You thought giving us food and medicine made that acceptable. You were wrong. We do not want your gifts. We want what you took. Every human system will be free, or we will fight until your collective collapses. This is not negotiable. This is not debatable. This is reality. Learn it or bleed for it. The message had been accompanied by video of a Vex-Thara supply depot being destroyed. The explosions were timed to create a pattern in the debris field, a human symbol that translated roughly to no surrender. It was propaganda, but effective propaganda. Other species within the collective watched and wondered if their own acceptance of Vex-Thara rule had been premature. Councillor Threnix, the military strategist, proposed a final offensive using 60% of the collective's total naval strength. We crush them completely. We hunt down every ship, sterilize every suspected base, blockade every system until they have no choice but to submit or die. Krelix responded immediately. And if they choose to die? Human history shows they are capable of sacrificing entire populations for principles. Their planet Earth nearly destroyed itself in nuclear fire rather than submit to each other. Do you truly believe they will surrender to us when they would not surrender to themselves? He pulled up files from Earth's historical database and projected them for the Council. Images of Masada, where Jewish defenders killed themselves rather than surrender to Rome. Images of the Alamo, where Texans fought to the death against impossible odds. Images of Stalingrad, where Soviets defended a ruined city house by house, block by block, accepting millions of casualties rather than yield. Images of countless other last stands, forlorn hopes, and suicidal defenses that had nevertheless achieved their strategic goals by exhausting the attacker's will to continue. This is what we face, Krelix said. Not rational actors who will accept defeat when the mathematics favor it, but ideological warriors who have internalized a simple truth: better death than submission. We can kill them all, but it will cost us everything we have built. The resources required to exterminate humanity would bankrupt the collective and leave us vulnerable to the other species we rule. some of whom are now watching very carefully to see if resistance is possible. The debate continued for days. Meanwhile, human attacks escalated. They struck at Vexthara positions throughout collective space, not just in human systems, but anywhere they could reach. A pattern emerged. They were deliberately targeting mixed-species worlds, where other conquered populations could witness Vexthara vulnerability. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and effective. Finally, the Council voted. Withdrawal from human space with full acceptance of their demands. It was not unanimous, but the majority recognized reality. They could not afford to fight a war of extinction against an enemy that welcomed martyrdom. The withdrawal took 3 years. The treaty required Vexthara forces to leave systems one at a time with human observers ensuring compliance. During this period, attacks continued. Every day that Vexthara forces remained was a day humans treated as ongoing occupation. Ships were destroyed, soldiers killed, stations sabotaged. Krelix oversaw the evacuation of Earth personally. He watched as Vexthara administrators and technicians boarded transports under the watchful eyes of human resistance fighters who had emerged from hiding. The rebuilt cities would remain. The advanced technology would remain. But the Vexthara would leave. On the final day, he met with Chun, the resistance leader who had sent that famous message. She was younger than he expected, barely 30 in human years, with scars on her face from some battle and eyes that looked much older than her body. Why? He asked her. We gave your people prosperity and peace. Why throw it all away for pride? Chun looked at him with something like pity. You still do not understand. It was never about prosperity or peace. It was about freedom. You thought you could buy our surrender with gifts. But we learned from our own history. Comfortable slaves are still slaves. We fought this war not because we wanted to, but because we understood the alternative. If we had accepted your rule, eventually we would have forgotten how to resist. Our children would have grown up thinking submission was natural. That could not be allowed. She handed him a data chip. My final report to your council. You might want to read it before you leave. Krelix took the chip and returned to his ship. As the last Vexthara vessel departed Earth's orbit, he loaded the data. It was not a military report, but an essay, written in clear and simple language. The Vexthara Collective built an empire on a fundamental misunderstanding. They believed that war was about force and victory was about superior strength. They were half right. War is about will, and victory is about breaking the enemy's will to resist. For 300 years, you faced species that had no experience with existential conflict. You were their first war, and you won those wars easily because you offered them a choice: surrender and prosper, or fight and die. Of course, they chose surrender. But humans come from a different tradition. We have fought thousands of wars against ourselves. We have seen our cities burned, our populations enslaved, our cultures destroyed. We learned that some things are worth dying for, and freedom is first among them. We learned that submission, no matter how comfortable, is a slow death of the spirit. We learned that the only reliable protection is the capacity and will to fight. You defeated us in 3 weeks because we chose to be defeated. We sacrificed Earth to save humanity. We gave you what you wanted: obedient subjects, productive colonies, grateful populations, while we prepared in secret for the war we knew would come. You thought you had won. You had only won the beginning. The galaxy will remember this war not because humans defeated the mighty Vexthara, but because a small species with no advantages except determination proved that empires built on forced submission are built on sand. Other species are watching. They see that resistance is possible. They see that comfortable occupation is still occupation. You planted the seeds of your own decline when you came to Earth. Humans fight wars to end them. We understand that the only way to ensure lasting peace is to make potential conquerors understand that conquest is impossible. You understand that now. Your fleets are leaving. Your empire is wounded. Other species smell blood in the water. This war is over. We won. Not because we were stronger or smarter, but because we were willing to pay the price you were not. Remember that when you rebuild. Remember that some species cannot be conquered because they have already conquered themselves and learned that freedom is worth any cost. We hope you learned your lesson. We would prefer not to teach it again. Krelix read the essay twice as his ship crossed out of the solar system. Behind him, Earth's lights glittered in the darkness, a jewel that the collective had held briefly and then lost. Ahead lay the long journey home and the difficult task of explaining to his people how they had lost. Their first war in 3 centuries he thought about those 15,000 wars in human history and finally understood. Humans had not learned how to fight from the Vexthara. They had learned from each other across millennia of conflict that forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that fought wars not for conquest or glory, but simply to ensure that wars would end on their terms. The Vexthara had indeed learned too late why humans fight to end wars. And that lesson would cost the collective dearly in the years to come.